I'm Adam Walker, a biometrics consultant, and this is the Pharma Prescribed podcast, where leaders, innovators, and hidden voices in healthcare open up. No sound bites, no spin, just raw insight, one prescription at a time. In an industry driven by data, protocols, and pressure, we rarely pause to ask the human questions: what drives us, what breaks us, and what truths live behind the titles we wear. Leigh Fell is a trailblazer in clinical research, a champion of corporate well-being, and the visionary founder of Caritas. Leigh's journey from managing oncology trials to building a purpose-driven CRO is a masterclass in blending scientific vigor with human-centered leadership. With a degree in physiology, sports science, and nutrition from the University of Glasgow, Leigh began her career running trials for cancer therapies. In 2017, she launched Caritas with a bold mission to create the company that not only advances medicine, but also nurtures its people. Today, Caritas specialises in trials of brain disorders and oncology, partnering with pharma innovators to address areas of profound unmet need. Leigh's leadership philosophy, what she calls corporate athleticism, has led to a 30% increase in employee retention and a culture where wellness and performance go hand in hand. That ethos earned her a place in the Sunday Times feature on 25 women succeeding in 2025, a spotlight on visionary leaders shaping the future of business, science, and society with purpose and resilience. Leigh, welcome to Pharma Prescribed. How are you?
Hello, thank you for having me. That was a lovely intro. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
It's great to see you. And as I said, it's been a while since we spoke, and I'm sure our audience would love to hear a little bit more about how Caritas came about, but more importantly, your own personal story and how you came to be sat here today.
Okay, well, I'll give you the brief history. You mentioned that my degree was in physiology, sports science, and nutrition, and I had just a general interest in all things health related. I kind of inadvertently fell into this industry. I just applied for anything and everything to do with science and ended up in clinical research, starting out very briefly in data management, which is your area, but quickly moving into the clinical operations side of things. So I've been in clinical development for 17 years now in a variety of different companies, CROs, big and small, but also pharma and biotech directly, and then started Caritas 8 years ago. So yeah, it's been quite a journey.
So, as someone who's also an independent consultant and someone who set up their own business, it's not a straightforward and straight line, is it, to building
No,
this empire that you sit behind?
well, no, it's amazing how things fluctuate, evolve over time. So yeah, the initial driver to set up my own business was to build a company that would look after its employees because I'd been a CRA and I'd experienced burnout as a CRA, and I really felt like you would get more from your employees if you treat them well. So I wanted to bring a company that would look after particularly clinical operations employees, but quickly it kind of evolved into something else. But my first work I did when I started was with GW Pharma, which was cannabinoids and pediatric epilepsy. And that really resonated with me because my brother and my uncle both had epilepsy when they were little. And then I realized that all the illnesses in my family had been neurological. So Alzheimer's, trauma, stroke, depression, epilepsy. So from there, I decided to try and build a neurology focused CRO and to try and bring the lessons learned from oncology into neurology. But over time, I was asked, or we were asked to do more and more oncology work because that was my network, my experience. So now we're open to all therapeutic areas. So it's really evolved over time. It's fluctuated with the way the market has gone, our strengths, I guess, but what has come naturally to us. And yeah, you have to, I guess, adapt with, especially over the last 8 years, there's been some pretty significant changes in the world. So the business has to adapt with those changes. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for explaining that. And I think certainly the first time that you and I spoke, I mentioned that the name Caritas meant something to me in the fact that it was the motto of my secondary school and means caring. So perhaps you could just explain a little bit more about that and how that came about for you. I'm assuming it connects back to that story of your own life experience with your own family, but perhaps you can elaborate.
Yeah, well, I think this may have been one of the things that we connected over originally because for me it was also my secondary school motto. So it was our school motto was Ex Corde Caritas, which means love from the heart. And I took the Caritas bit, which for me meant love for all. So because I wanted to build this company that would look after all of its people, its clients, the patients, but also our own employees. So all the people. So love for all is where the name Caritas came from, and yet it has that long term meaning for me. So it's the name has actually evolved. It started as Caritas Clinical, but turned out there was a company in the US called that already, and then it evolved to Caritas Neuro Solutions and now Caritas Bioscience. So yeah.
I love the principles behind it, and I think the most important work is done from a place of intention, and it's clear where your intentions come from. And certainly, when I've followed you over the last few years, your posts on LinkedIn are fabulous. I love the personal ones as much as the professional ones, and I can see that you've got a dog that you're very well trained, and you've done yoga and you've done all sorts of other activities. And how have you built that into the company on a day-to-day basis? How does that become your everyday?
Yeah, well, that was very early on. We set that as kind of the ethos of the company. Obviously, with the name meaning love for all, we want to look after our own people. Hopefully, if we look after our own people, they will look after the business in that Richard Branson scheme of things. So within our business, well-being of employees has always come first. We on team calls, we would start with a gratitude session. So we'd all go around the group and say something we're grateful for that day. So we start the meetings off on a positive note. And it also helped us bond a little bit. We're all working remotely. So it's just a nice way to bring some human interaction into our team meetings. But we'd also have regular get-togethers where we actually did things like yoga. We did aerial yoga at some point, and we did all sorts of different team bonding things that were always well-being themed. As you say, I've trained as a yoga teacher, so that's in my outside world. So I try and bring, I guess, kind of the philosophies from that into how I lead. But I also, with having the background in sports science and nutrition, my real passion is in whole person health. So that is well-being from, eating the right things, doing the right exercise, getting sleep, working on your mindset, but also it could be having the right pharmaceutical treatments as well. I think it's all a part of the whole, and I want to bring that into how we look after our employees. As I say, I think our employees are more likely to have fulfilled, happy careers and lives if they are looking after their own well-being. But also, we want to somehow introduce that into our trial designs as well. So we've always had this kind of offering, which we've called Caritas Cohesion in the past, which is almost having a third arm in our trial designs where we introduce coaching or mindset training alongside the pharmaceutical intervention to hopefully really bring the best out of the drug. So in clinical trials, we are often trying to show that a medicine can beat the placebo effect, but I feel like we have an opportunity to add in the placebo effect as a positive. So yes, we still want to show there's difference there between the drug and the placebo, but can we also show that if you actively engage your mindset, you can then further enhance the performance of the drug and ultimately the outcomes for patients.
Yeah, you make a really interesting point there around mindset. And of course, a lot of people are talking now around mental health, but there are plenty of podcasts out there. There's lots of information out there in the public domain. Have you seen, or how have you seen that shift, in the last 5 to 10 years? Because we've had the pandemic, which we know has been a mental health crisis for many, many people. And before that, there have been other interventions that have clearly impacted people. You mentioned your own experience of burnout. I'd love to know, how you've seen that transfer into the public domain.
Yeah, there's been a huge shift since I started the business, both in mental health and just neurology, kind of in general. When I started Caritas 8 years ago, all the big pharmas were kind of shutting down their neurology pipelines because there was there was a 99.6% failure rate at that point, so it wasn't really worth the investment. We've seen a couple of big approvals in the last year or so in Alzheimer's, and hopefully that will give some confidence to this field. And I think there's been a huge shift in the investment in that space, and hopefully we will see further developments. But also in the mental health side of things, we started out really early on, really campaigning for people to speak about mental health, because at that point it was, still kind of taboo at that point to talk about mental health. And then, as you say, after the pandemic, there's been this huge shift where it is now very commonly spoken about. I think there's still a long way to go, but it's a completely different world that we're in now in that space. But I think there's still a gap between bringing the mindset together with kind of physical health. There's still a lot of people who see those as two separate things, whereas I see them as a whole. You cannot have good physical health if you have poor mental health, and vice versa. So I think we still have some way to go in terms of bringing that all together, particularly in our healthcare systems. It's all very segregated at the moment, so I don't know how we bring that together in our healthcare, but I think that's something that needs to be focused on going forward. So
I'm curious, when you were talking around how you measure those types of actions around, is it quality of life measures and questionnaires and e-pros that you're intervening into clinical trials? Is that how you're approaching it?
that's certainly what we've done up to now, questionnaires and e-pros. I think they're going forward, there's scope for more translational kind of measurements and more objective measurements. I think it very much depends on the individual indication. But we know, for example, that mindset makes a difference to actual physical outcomes in an individual illness. So I think, we can show, well, one of the examples I would probably bring to mind is the weight loss drugs, the GLP-1 drugs, Ozempic and Mounjaro, and those things. Those have been very effective for weight loss, but they're most effective when you use them in conjunction with programs for proper exercise and nutrition and mindset. So that's a real objective measurement. I mean, you can measure weight loss objectively. So I think it's not just a mental measurement. It's not just a subjective measurement. I think that there are real impacts that can be made through engaging the power of the mind. I think that placebo is a very misunderstood thing. I think people think it's a sort of imaginary thing, but if we can teach people that it's really engaging your immune system and it's almost switching it on, then and people start to see it from that perspective, then we can look at ways of objectively measuring it more effectively.
That's really fascinating. And thank you for explaining that a little bit more. In my own family, we've had experiences recently of stroke and Alzheimer's. And following on from the point around, the mental health crisis, is it my imagination or are more people experiencing neurological outcomes like stroke and like Alzheimer's? Is it, what's your sense? What's your perspective on that?
I'm not sure whether we're just getting better at diagnosing some of these things. I mean, partly people are living longer, so that will have an impact on dementias and Alzheimer's. They are among the biggest killers in the world, alongside heart disease and cancers. And yeah, it's partly because we're an aging population. I think people are, because pharmaceuticals have got more effective, people are living longer, but not necessarily living healthier. So that's where some of these progressive diseases come into play. Alzheimer's, actually, we know that it kind of starts when you're in your 30s, but you don't really see the results of it until much later on. So if we can find a way of diagnosing these things earlier on, then that would be really key. But yeah, there's probably been more of a focus on it. And I think we have got better at treating some of the other diseases. Cancer is now often a chronic disease rather than a killer. We've still got a long way to go with that as well, but people are living with that on a long-term basis. So yeah, that's probably why there's an increase in some of these other diseases associated with old age.
Yeah, I think cultural awareness is a thing as well, isn't it? Because we are more informed more broadly, not just within the scientific and life science community. I think messages are getting out there in the public domain. There's far more on the TV and on the radio than there ever has been,
Yeah.
talking about health. And I think the pandemic itself drove scientific language into the public domain, didn't it? And brought an awareness of self and health versus outcomes. From a personal point of view, a couple of years ago, I remember going to my GP, my general practitioner, and asking for a full set of bloods around my 50th birthday because I'd been listening to lots of health outcomes conversations in and around the places where I was working. And I was told that that was really a very important stage gate to encourage longevity, but also that quality of life. It's not just extending your life, it's the quality of that extending of life.
Yeah.
And actually, it's not something that's normally provided in the UK. And I don't know whether many people realize that anymore. It used to be a point at which all of your bloods were taken and all of your measurements. And now it's something that you have to do either privately or physically insist upon it with your general practitioner in the UK. So I'm curious what your thoughts around that might be as far as, extending that quality of life rather than just extension of later life.
Yeah, I think there are a lot more people who are well informed about health, but there's also a lot of information that's really confusing out there. There's so many podcasts and things that sometimes it's really difficult to know what things to listen to and what not to. So, but it is good that people are becoming more interested. I think there's probably kind of a split in demographics there, and there's, part of the population that do take a more active role. And we probably need to try and extend that culture out as much as we possibly can, especially with the NHS under so much strain. There's no way, no health system in the world can do everything. So we do have to try and do a bit more for ourselves or take a bit more proactive role ourselves, which is partly why, I think corporate cultures need to be supporting employees to stay healthy, and partly why that we felt we should be at the forefront of that because we're in an industry that's all about health. So surely we should be supporting our own employees to be healthy. But yeah, it is. I've seen more and more people having to reach out to private clinics and things for their own health. And it's, yeah, obviously not everyone is able to do that. So yeah, we have to change the culture around proactively looking after our own health, which is partly why I'm so passionate about whole person health, because there are some just simple things that can be done to make a difference. So
Tell me a couple of those simple things.
well,
Give us
I'm
a couple of headlines from your
I
perspective.
guess for people that really struggle with exercise, just encouraging people to get out for walks and get out in fresh air, just listening to meditations on YouTube that are free. Those things are free, and there's a lot of resources that are free that you can access for, mental health or exercise. So just encouraging, I guess, showing people what's out there and what small steps you can take.
Well, I'm just wondering about diet. So, where do you sit around, I don't know, vegetarian slash vegan diets versus heavy meats and, I don't know, lots of alcohol in your diet? I'll put it out there.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, alcohol is one thing that I have almost completely cut out over the last year or two. I just felt like that was really having an impact on my mental health. I'd always feel really depressed for 2 or 3 days after having even just a couple of drinks. So I've more or less completely cut that out. And I think that is one thing that we really underestimate how toxic that can be. I think I think it can be a part of a healthy lifestyle if in moderation. But for me, I had to move away from it really. In terms of diet, I have always believed in just, kind of everything in moderation. I don't believe in crazy fad diets. Obviously, try and have as much vegetables as you can. I think the really key thing right now, the biggest message that I've learned is about trying to reduce ultra processed foods, trying to reduce ultra processed foods. Try and just keep your diet as natural as possible as much of the time. If you have little bits and pieces here and there, treats here and there, absolutely fine. But yeah, I'm a big believer in just everything in moderation. I also think different things work for different people. So you have to be very careful about what you read online. So it's usually all the extremes that are online. Look up the healthy eating guidelines and follow those, I would suggest. I actually track my diet on an app called Chronometer. So I try and stick roughly to make sure I'm getting, the right level of nutrients and macronutrients and micronutrients and on vitamins and things like that. Try my best. And I think when you track your diet, you just become more aware of what you're eating and make better choices. So yeah, that's one thing I would say. Just start tracking your diet. Even writing it down on a bit of paper makes you aware of what you do, what you're eating. So
I think that's very helpful. And my son is studying sports and exercise science
ah,
himself. He's going into his second year at university. And when he's at home over the summer, I can see that, he's doing his meal prep. He's very clear about, the different food groups that are going into that. We have had a number of conversations around alcohol. And to follow on with your particular point around, reducing your intake of alcohol from a personal point of view, I stopped drinking alcohol 5.5 years ago, and it has utterly transformed my life. And I know that my friends and family will tell you that I've become this kind of evangelical sober bore. But I'm so fine with that because, from my own personal point of view, it's unlocked probably 20 or 30% of capability I never knew I had. It's given me motivation that I didn't think was accessible, but also the sleep is so much better. The recovery from any exercise movement is definitely noticeable. I've certainly lost some weight, which isn't a bad thing. And I'm just more present in day-to-day life. And in social settings, it isn't the crutch. Alcohol isn't the crutch for me that I always thought I needed it to be. And
yeah,
I think that can be threatening to the people that you can be around. I've grown up in and around sports clubs, rugby and
yeah,
football a lot. And alcohol is central to rugby,
yeah,
particularly. And, my son Sam is a big rugby player. I mean, he's literally enormous. So I've grown up with that as much as he's seen me
yeah,
performing in that environment where alcohol has been front and center. So it's it's again another one of those aspects that I'm finding generally the next generation are drinking less. My daughter is 22. She doesn't drink that much. She's not that bothered. She's very much take it or leave it. And she recognizes the impact that's had on her and has on her. Samuel's slightly different at the moment, but we'll leave that one out there. He's working on it. I
yeah,
think he's
yeah.
working on it. And as I speak, he's visiting a friend up in London. And rather than go out drinking, they decided they were going to go and watch a film. So they went and watched a film and had a very pleasant night in
Nice.
afterwards. So
Yeah, no, I get that. For me, it was came from sports clubs as well. I was in the hockey club, and that was the culture. It centered around that. And yeah, the toughest thing when you're cutting out alcohol is the social settings where people expect you to want to have a drink. But I have found it okay as well. I mean, recently we had a hockey club reunion, and it was everyone reverted to form, and there was a lot of wine going around, but I wasn't drinking at all, and you can still have just as much fun. So yeah, it just takes some getting used to, I think. So, but it is an adjustment. It's definitely an adjustment, but
I've certainly discovered that I remember more the next day, and I will have conversations with people a week or two later, and they'll say, "I don't remember saying that," and I said, "Oh, well, you definitely did say that." And sometimes there are these repeating stories that go around that people don't remember that they told you, but
yeah,
I never forget them. You see, and I might see them again, and it comes up, and I have to just
yeah.
bite my tongue actually because I feel like I'm like
But it's
wired
interesting.
slightly differently.
Yeah, well, it's interesting the psychology around alcohol and how it compares to drugs because people don't see it as a drug. Whenever I've sort of talked about, I've done bits and pieces in the psychedelic space and cannabinoids as well, and people just people or even oncology drugs, people who are sitting with a drink in their hand will give you sort of grief about being in the pharmaceutical world and how drugs do you harm, but they don't realize that the drug that's in their hand is one of the most harmful there is. So, I mean, obviously, oncology drugs can have terrible side effects, but compared to some of the things that we use to help people, I think alcohol is, yeah, people don't realize. quite what level it's on, and I think compared to some products, pharmaceutical products.
I absolutely agree. And I think just that whole awareness and having the conversation is actually not a bad thing, is it?
Yeah.
And I appreciate your insight into that because, as I say, there is quite a lot of alignment clearly around our principles and values, you and I, as
Yeah.
much as the way we're living our lives, because there is a perspective that I often come back to, which is a cliche, but health is wealth. And you can't buy good health. When people lose their health, their mental capacity, their physical capacity, it's very difficult to regain that. Once it's gone, it's gone. You know, it's a very slippery slope. And as I say, I've seen that firsthand, and everything that we can do and to share with our audience, you know,
Yeah.
there are only good intentions behind sharing these messages. So I appreciate you
Yeah.
sharing that, Leigh. So back to now Caritas and the business, and
Yeah.
how are things now, 8-9 years down the line, and what's the next period of
Yeah.
time looking like for Caritas?
Well, I can't quite believe it's been 8 years. It's been nearly a decade of my life in the making, which just blows my mind really, because it doesn't seem that long. It's been quite a journey. Obviously, the market has fluctuated over the last few years in a variety of ways, as I've already mentioned. It's kind of a transformational time, I think, for everyone. The whole industry is going through a period of transformation. So we are as a business as well looking ahead. It's hard to know what the industry will look like in 5 years with AI coming in. I feel like that's going to change things a lot. But we are looking in how we move with the times in that respect, how we can make the most of it. But I think also doubling down on our belief in humans and looking after humans, because that's central to it all. And the more that AI takes over, the more we're going to need the human input. I think regulators and ethics committees want to see real patient and human engagement early in the process, but also real benefits for humans at the end of it. So we really have to make sure that we have that human input. So I think doubling down on our belief in whole person health and whole human health and how we bring that into our trial designs is definitely a central focus. Yeah.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, the human in the loop, because of course that's our job. We are the
Yeah.
humans in the loop. Many of the conversations I've had recently on this podcast have been around the potential impact of AI, large language models, and agentic robotics. I wonder, are you seeing any of that being implemented with some of the pharma companies that you're working with and alongside?
I think there's what I've seen a lot of is in the discovery space, really. So I guess we're, discovering new potential molecules and things for AI. There's been a lot of conversations around how AI can be used for, protocol design and medical writing and all those kinds of things. I think what I'm keen to see is how we can streamline processes so that we're spending less time on filling in spreadsheets and all the things that just take up too much time, and focusing more on on the human side of it. And yeah, so I think there's definitely things in the pipeline that will benefit the way we manage trials, more streamlined and hopefully less and less convoluted, because things are getting more complicated. But yeah, and I think there will be benefits in identifying molecules as well, hopefully reducing side effects and improving safety profiles. That's what I'm looking forward to seeing. But
Yeah, I would follow on from that by saying perhaps that, yeah, it's the day-to-day things that take the effort that really are quite simple, aren't they? You know,
yeah,
they're not necessarily deep science. They don't require deep science to do the role of a CRA, you know, check this with this and maybe cross-check spreadsheets and various other things that we would always have done in the past. But actually, there are some very good tools that are being developed out there
yeah,
in the palm of our hand and on our computer desktops already. I think the only concern, or one of several concerns I have, and what many pharma companies and biotechs are concerned about, is that their data is retained internal to their organizations behind those secure firewalls, that patient confidentiality is maintained and retained, and more importantly, that key decisions are made by those humans in the loop, the most appropriately qualified, and not a chatbot.
Yeah.
Not yet, anyway.
Yeah. So then I think the challenge will be we obviously have hugely talented and hugely experienced people that can make those decisions at the moment, but how do we bring the next generation up with that level of knowledge and understanding if bots are doing all the groundwork that we learned they learned the ropes from doing all of that. So how do we bring the next generation up with that level of knowledge? I don't know the answer to that, but I guess that's where one of the challenges would be in new
We'll
generation.
leave that one out there for our audience to
Yeah.
maybe respond back to us in the comments after this one. I really appreciate your, the clarity with which you've explained the company ethos behind Caritas, and I hope our audience will understand a little bit more about you, the person behind the organization. I always like to finish with a quick fire round where I give our interviewees the opportunity to answer some very quick questions. So the first one being, what is the one piece of advice you would give to your younger self?
I would definitely say do what you love rather than what seems like the sensible thing. Yeah, follow your heart and do what you love.
100% agree with that, by the way. Same advice we've given to our children as well.
Yeah.
What are the top 3 qualities you value most when building a team?
Yeah, well, you need a variety of different personality types on a team. So yeah, they can look very different, I think, and have different personalities. But I actually always ask the question in interviews, what are your top 3 values? So I find out what they are, sort of where they're coming from as a person. For me, definitely kindness towards other people. That makes you a good team player and things, always doing things with kindness. I always look for people who can use their own initiative because we're a small team. Everyone has to get stuck in with bits of everything. So it needs to be people who can, especially when I've taken on graduates, they need to be people who can think for themselves and go and figure out how to do things. So initiative, kindness, and well, I'd always probably look for people who are genuinely interested in the science as well and in the mission. So people who are enthusiastic about it. Yeah.
That's brilliant. And I mentioned some of the things that I know that you do outside of work, but what is the favorite thing that you have
Yeah.
outside of your work?
Well, you already mentioned my dog. He is the best thing in my life. I've got a 6-month-old Labrador puppy, and we're doing gun dog training, so that keeps us busy. I love drawing him, painting him, and training and walks in the hills. I live right on the edge of the hills, so walks in the hills. Anything to do with my dog, basically. So,
That's
yeah.
lovely. I would say very similar. I've got 3 dogs and 2 sprockers that are mad, one of which was scratching at the door just a
Oh.
minute ago, and a little Cavalier King Charles that's our bed warmer. So I absolutely hear you on that. They're not quite trained like gun dogs, though. They'd like to be. They chase a ball or two. And finally, what is your number 1 golden rule for life and business, Leigh?
Always treat others the way you would want to be treated, whether that's in how you work together on a team, whether that's when you have to make difficult decisions, how would you want that news to come across? Yeah, always treat, even in how you interact with other businesses as well. How would you want to be treated as a business? So yeah, that's the number 1 thing. Always think how you would want to treat others the way you would want to be treated.
I think it's a lovely, lovely way to conclude the conversation. As I say, you've touched on so many personal and professional areas in this conversation, and hopefully our audience will understand a lot more about you and certainly the mission that Caritas is on. So I'd like to thank you for your time today, but also if any of our audience would like to reach out to you, what's the best way to make contact with you, Leigh?
Well, active on LinkedIn, that's the best way to message me, or we do have a website, so caritasbioscience.com. But yeah, LinkedIn's the best way to find me.
Thank you once again for your time coming on Pharma Prescribed today, Leigh.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed our chat.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.